How did you know you were transgender? Story 1. I'm 19, grew up in a tight-knit Filipino-American household. I was the ideal good daughter. Ballet lessons, piano recitals, and a focus on academics were the pillars of my upbringing. My parents, both immigrants from the Philippines, held on to traditional values. I found comfort in the digital world, losing myself in video games. These online spaces offered an escape, a place where I could be anyone and anything. My room, a shelter decorated with anime posters and action figures, was a big difference from the pure image I projected to the outside world. During my sophomore year of high school, I met Mr. Evans, an English teacher who challenged my perspective. His classroom was a haven of intellectual curiosity, a place where questions were encouraged and critical thinking was celebrated. One afternoon, after class, we engaged in a conversation that would change my life. He spoke about gender, identity, and the societal pressures we face. His words resonated with me, planting a seed of doubt about the life I was expected to live. As I delved deeper into my own thoughts and feelings, I realized the discomfort I had been experiencing with my gender identity. The expectations placed upon me as a Filipino woman felt increasingly restrictive. I talked to my best friend Emily, who listened without judgment. Her support became a lifeline during those rough times. The turning point came when I finally told Mom and Dad how I felt. I was so scared, but I couldn't keep it inside anymore. We sat at the kitchen table and I tried to explain that I didn't feel like a girl all the time. Mom started crying right away. She said things like, "What will people say? And you're making me so sad." Dad got really mad. He said I was being selfish and that I should be grateful for everything they've done. He even used some words in Tagalog that I didn't understand, but I knew he was really upset. They kept saying I was going to hell and that this was a phase. I tried to tell them it wasn't a choice, but they wouldn't listen. They said I was watching too many bad things on the internet. It was like a big fight. They were really loud and angry. I felt so small and scared. The day after the big fight, I woke up to find my bags packed and waiting by the door. A note was taped to the fridge. "We need time to think about this." It was cold and final. Heartbreak washed over me as I realized I was being kicked out. I called Emily, my only lifeline. Without hesitation, she offered me a place to stay. Her small apartment became my sanctuary, a place where I could start to rebuild my life. Living on my own was hard. I had to figure out how to pay rent, buy groceries, and do laundry. It was like learning to survive all over again. But I was determined to make it work. I found a part-time job at a coffee shop and started taking online classes to finish high school. Story 2. It was the summer of 2021 when the first cracks began to appear. I was 19, a rising junior at the University of Michigan. Major in engineering, join a frat, and land a well-paying job after graduation. The blueprint for a successful life, as laid out by my parents and society. Beneath the surface, however, a storm was brewing. There was a growing disconnect between the person I presented to the world and the person I felt myself to be. Like the time in high school, around 2017, when I'd secretly admired a classmate's outfit. Or the way I'd sometimes catch myself envying the confidence of the girls who seemed to effortlessly navigate social situations. It wasn't until the fall of 2020 that things started to crystallize. I joined an online art community and met a user named Riley. Their art was raw, emotional, and unlike anything I'd seen before. We started chatting and getting close as we added each other on Discord afterwards. Riley was open and accepting, a stark contrast to the shallow relationships I had. During one of our late-night online conversations, the topic of gender identity came up. Riley spoke about their own journey with a vulnerability that was both inspiring and unsettling. It was as if they were illuminating a hidden part of myself. Riley described feeling a disconnect between their physical body and their internal sense of self. They talked about the societal pressures to conform, and the fear of rejection if they were to come out. It was like listening to a mirror image of my own unspoken thoughts. I started to examine my own experiences through a new lens. The fashion magazines I secretly read, the desire to experiment with makeup, the fleeting moments of envy towards female friends, these were all pieces of a larger puzzle. I realized I'd been suppressing a significant part of myself for years. The fear of rejection was scary. As an only child, raised in a traditional household, the thought of coming out to my parents was terrifying. Yet, there was a growing sense of urgency. I couldn't continue living a lie. The person I was becoming felt more authentic, more real. With each passing day, the desire to embrace my true self grew stronger. The first step was the hardest, coming out to myself. It was a quiet, solitary moment, a recognition that I was transgender. The weight of this realization was immense, but so was the sense of liberation. I was no longer a prisoner of a gender that didn't fit. The thought of telling my parents terrified me. I knew their reaction wouldn't be easy. My dad, with his strong beliefs about traditional family roles, and my mom, deeply rooted in her faith, would be blindsided. Still, the lie I was living was becoming unbearable. One evening, I gathered my courage and sat them down at the kitchen table. "Mom, Dad, there's something important I need to talk about," I began, my voice trembling. My mom's face turned pale. I took a deep breath. "I don't feel like a girl," I blurted out. Silence filled the room. My mom's eyes welled up with tears. "What do you mean, sweetie?" she asked, her voice soft. Dad, on the other hand, was furious. "This is nonsense," he thundered. "You're confusing yourself with these new age ideas." My mom, to my surprise, was the first to calm down. She pulled me into a hug, tears streaming down her face. "I love you no matter what," she whispered. Dad stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I was left alone with Mom, her arms wrapped tightly around me. She promised to talk to Dad, to try to help him understand. It was a glimmer of hope in a sea of uncertainty. For the first time, I felt a sense of acceptance, a belief that things might not be as bleak as they seemed. The next steps involved navigating the complex world of healthcare. Finding a therapist who specializes in gender dysphoria was crucial. With their guidance, I began the process of hormone therapy, a medical transition that would align my physical body with my gender identity. The initial changes were subtle, but the psychological impact was big. I felt like I was finally becoming the person I was meant to be. Changing my name and gender marker on legal documents was another hurdle. It was a long process filled with paperwork and waiting, but the anticipation of finally seeing my correct name and gender on official documents was a source of immense joy. One of the most challenging aspects of transitioning was the social transition. Introducing myself as a different gender to friends was nerve-wracking. Some people were accepting, others were confused, and a few were outright hostile. But with each positive interaction, my confidence grew. Story 3. I'm 18 now, but the seeds of doubt were planted much earlier. Around the age of 7, I remember sneaking into my brother's room, drawn to the comfort of his old t-shirts and jeans. There was a freedom in those baggy clothes, a sense of belonging I couldn't quite place. I'd spend hours lost in his closet, imagining myself as one of the action heroes from his comic books. Of course, my mom would always catch me and I'd be sent away to change back into my dresses, a silent protest forming in my young mind. As I hit puberty, around 13, the pressure to conform intensified. Frilly dresses, makeup tutorials, and endless discussions about boys became the norm among my friends. I tried to fit in, but it felt like wearing a costume. There was a growing disconnect between the person I was expected to be and the person I felt myself to be. It was during the summer of 2022, when I was 16, that everything started to shift. I was at a sleepover with my best friend Alex, when we had one of those late-night heart-to-hearts. They mentioned something about gender fluidity, and it was like a puzzle piece falling into place. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone in feeling like I didn't quite fit. That night changed everything. I started questioning every aspect of my identity. Why did I feel a surge of happiness when I found old boy band t-shirts at a thrift store? Why did I cringe at the thought of wearing makeup? And why did the idea of a romantic relationship with a guy fill me with dread? The turning point came in December of that same year. I'd been experimenting with a more androgynous style, and while it was terrifying, it also felt liberating. I remember looking in the mirror one morning after cutting my hair shorter and feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced before. It was like looking at a stranger who was also strangely familiar. Telling my parents was an ordeal I'd dreaded for months. The day I finally mustered the courage, the living room felt like the coldest place on earth. Their reactions were a mix of shock, disbelief, and anger. They couldn't comprehend it. To them, I was their child, a role they'd meticulously crafted. My identity was a direct challenge to their carefully constructed world. I moved out shortly after. The initial freedom was intoxicating, but the loneliness was overwhelming. I was learning to cook, do laundry, and manage finances, all while grappling with my identity. There were days when the weight of it all was unbearable. I'd retreat into my room, questioning if I made the wrong decision. Over time, I began to understand that the gender binary didn't encompass my experience. The labels woman and man felt restrictive, like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I realized that my identity was fluid, complex, and unique. Embracing the term non-binary felt like coming home. It's a journey, not a destination. There are still days of uncertainty and self-doubt, but I'm learning to embrace all parts of myself. Story 4. 23 They Them. Growing up in the suburbs of Boston, I was your typical all-American boy. Baseball, video games, and the relentless pursuit of the next best skateboarding trick were my world. It started in high school, around 2014. While my friends were obsessed with sports stats, I found myself drawn to fashion magazines. I'd spend hours poring over looks, imagining myself in those clothes. My room became a chaotic blend of sports memorabilia and fashion spreads. My friends thought it was weird, but I convinced myself it was just a phase, a harmless obsession with style. Then, in the spring of 2017, during my freshman year of college, I stumbled upon a makeup tutorial on YouTube. Curiosity got the better of me. Armed with my sister's old makeup kit, I locked myself in the bathroom. The initial awkwardness turned into a strange kind of fascination. I experimented with eyeliner and mascara, feeling a thrill of exhilaration mixed with a deep sense of shame. It was in the summer of 2020 when everything changed. I met Sarah at a friend's barbecue. She was unlike anyone I'd met before, open, intelligent, and with a laugh that could light up a room. We quickly became inseparable. One evening, after a few glasses of wine, we were talking about everything and nothing, when she casually mentioned something about gender identity. It was a throwaway comment, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. She started talking about her own experiences, her doubts, and her journey of self-discovery. I listened, mesmerized. She pointed out things I'd never noticed before. How I'd always gravitated towards feminine color palettes, how I'd unconsciously adopted certain mannerisms, and how I'd often caught myself daydreaming about a different life. It was like she was peering into my soul, exposing the parts of myself I'd carefully hidden. The more we talked, the more the pieces started to fall into place. It was terrifying, but also strangely liberating. That conversation with Sarah was a turning point. It was like someone had finally given voice to the unspoken turmoil within me. In the following weeks, I found myself delving deeper into the world of gender identity. I spent countless hours online, reading articles, watching videos, and connecting with others who were going through similar experiences. The more I learned, the more I realized that what I was feeling wasn't just a phase or an odd quirk. It was a fundamental part of who I am. The idea of transitioning, once unthinkable, started to feel like a possible path forward. It was terrifying, but the prospect of living my entire life inauthentically was even scarier. With Sarah's unwavering support, I started to explore different aspects of my identity. I experimented with clothing styles, trying on items that had always intrigued me but that I'd never dared to wear. I began to use different pronouns when referring to myself, testing the waters to see how it felt. It was a slow, gradual process, filled with self-doubt and moments of sheer panic. There were days when I wanted to retreat back into the safety of my old self, to ignore the growing realization that I was trans. But the desire to be authentic, to live a life that felt true to myself, was stronger. Coming out to my family and friends was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Some were supportive, others were confused, and a few were outright hostile. But with each person who accepted me, I felt a little stronger. I'm still figuring things out, and I know there's a long road ahead, but for the first time in my life, I'm starting to feel like I'm finally becoming the person I was always meant to be.